A full-scale investigation is underway in Dubai after the HMM Namu, damaged by an explosion and fire in the Strait of Hormuz, arrived at port on Friday. As Haru says, it'll wait for the results of the probe before drawing conclusions. The United States and Iran have clashed once again in the Strait of Hormuz, just a day after President Donald Trump said the chances of a peace deal were very high. Korea logged its largest ever monthly current account surplus in March, fueled by robust exports and soaring global demand for semiconductors. Just a day after U.S. President Donald Trump said a peace deal with Iran was within reach, the two sides exchanged a fire again near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran accused Washington of violating the ceasefire, while the U.S. said it carried out self-defense strikes and insisted the truce remains in effect. Our Kim Junong has our top story tonight.
The United States and Iran exchanged military strikes near the Strait of Hormuz on Thursday local time. Citing a senior U.S. official, Fox News reported that the U.S. military carried out airstrikes on Iran's Qeshm port and Bandar Abbas. Earlier in the day, Iran's semi-official news agency reported explosions around Qeshm Island near the Strait of Hormuz and in Bandar Abbas in southern Iran. Tehran accused Washington of violating the ceasefire. Iranian state media claimed the U.S. targeted two ships in the Strait of Hormuz and that, quote, enemy forces were hit by Iranian missiles and retreated. The exchange of fire was later confirmed by the U.S. military. U.S. Central Command said American forces intercepted unprovoked Iranian attacks and responded with self-defense strikes as U.S. Navy guided missile destroyers transited the Strait of Hormuz toward the Gulf of Oman. U.S. President Donald Trump also confirmed the strikes on social media, saying American destroyers were not damaged, but great damage was done to Iranian attackers. Speaking to ABC News, Trump said the incident was a, quote, love tap and said the ceasefire between the two countries was still in effect. He then pressed Tehran to move quickly on a proposed agreement. According to the New York Times, Trump urged Iran to quickly sign the agreement, then warned that one big glow would be seen coming out of Iran. The remarks referred to a one-page proposal from the United States that calls for reopening the Strait of Hormuz and suspending fighting for 30 days while broader negotiations continue. Meanwhile, the White House announced that Trump will deliver remarks in the Rose Garden at noon on Friday local time. However, no details were provided on the topic of the speech. Kim Junong, Arirang News.
In the meantime, a South Korean team has begun its investigation in the UAE into the cause of a detonation and ensuing the fire on a South Korean-operated cargo carrier in the Strait of Hormuz. Kim So-young has the latest.
A cargo vessel operated by South Korean shipping company HMM, damaged by an onboard explosion and fire near the Strait of Hormuz, arrived at dry docks Word Dubai, the Middle East's largest ship repair facility, on Friday. According to HMM and local officials, the vessel was towed from waters near Al Quayan in the United Arab Emirates and reached the Dubai port area shortly after midnight Thursday, roughly 12 hours after towing operations began. South Korean authorities have launched a full-scale investigation into the incident, with on-site inspections now underway. A South Korean government team comprising investigators from the Korea Maritime Safety Tribunal and forensic fire experts from the National Fire Agency is conducting the probe. Investigators are looking into whether the explosion and fire were caused by an external attack, including the possibility of Iranian involvement, or by an internal issue such as a mechanical defect aboard the vessel. The authorities said there have so far been no signs of hull damage consistent with the military strike, and the ship was reportedly neither listing nor taking on water following the incident. Meanwhile, a senior Iranian lawmaker denied Tehran's involvement during video talks on Thursday with South Korean lawmaker Kim Seok-ki. According to Kim, Iranian Parliament Committee Chairman Ibrahim Azizi said that if Iran had attacked a Korean vessel, the government or military would have officially announced it. South Korea's foreign ministry also declined to comment directly on Iranian media reports, saying establishing the facts and determining the exact cause of the incident remain government's top priority. Kim Seo-young, Arirang News.
The National Assembly has halted its plans to reintroduce its constitutional reform bill during Friday's plenary session for a floor vote. The halt comes in response to threats of a filibuster by the main opposition People Power Party. The Blue House, for its part, shared regret through a statement and urged the lawmakers to continue efforts to bridge the gap over differences. An earlier vote on the constitutional reform bill back on Thursday was declared invalid in the absence of a quorum, as the PPP condemned the bill as rushed. The bill, however, is backed by 6 parties, including the ruling Democratic Party, and seeks to strengthen safeguards against martial law declarations. The leaders of Korea and Canada discussed the ways to deepen bilateral ties during talks on the phone today. According to senior Blue House spokesperson Kang Yoo-jung, President Lee Jae-myung expressed hopes for productive partnership in areas such as security and energy, and these hopes were shared by Prime Minister Mark Carney. They also agreed to work together to support a peaceful resolution to the situation in the Middle East and ensure freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. The call came as Korea and Germany compete for a multi-billion-dollar submarine deal with Canada. The preferred bidder is expected to be announced next month. Korea's current account surplus soared to a record monthly high of over $37 billion in March, fueled by a sharp surge in semiconductor and other IT exports. Park Jun-han has more.
Korea's current account surplus reached a record high in March, fueled by a surge in exports of information technology products such as semiconductors and computer peripherals. According to preliminary data from the Bank of Korea on Friday, the country's current account recorded a surplus of $37.33 billion in March. This is the largest monthly surplus ever recorded, which is up 289.7% year-on-year and 61% higher than February, which was the previous record monthly high. As a result, the account surplus in March recorded its 35th consecutive month in the black. The goods account alone posted a surplus of $35.07 billion as exports jumped nearly 57% compared to a year earlier to over $94 billion. The historic performance was almost entirely driven by a super rally in the information technology sector. Semiconductor exports skyrocketed by nearly 150%, while shipments of information and communication devices grew by 78.1%. Regionally, exports to Southeast Asia and China saw massive growth of over 60%. However, exports to the Middle East plunged by over 49% amid ongoing regional instability. While exports saw an unprecedented monthly high, the financial account signaled a major shift in investor sentiment. Foreign investors pulled a record $29.33 billion out of the Korean stock market in March. March's massive outflow came as foreign investors locked in profits from Korea's strong tech-driven rally. The selling pressure especially intensified as heightened geopolitical risks weighed on investor sentiment. As Korea's IT sector continues to dominate global semiconductor markets, the challenge remains for the economy to maintain this momentum while navigating volatile foreign investment and shifting global conditions. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
A U.S. federal trade court has struck down U.S. President Donald Trump's 10% global tariff, a ruling he exceeded his legal authority in imposing it. Our Kim Do-yeon has the details.
A U.S. federal trade court has ruled that President Donald Trump exceeded his authority by imposing a 10% global tariff on imported goods. In a 2-1 decision issued on Thursday local time, the Court of International Trade invalidated the administration's use of Section 122 of the Trade Act and that it was not intended to address the types of trade deficits cited by Trump. The businesses argued the tariffs were an attempt to bypass a Supreme Court ruling that struck down Trump's 2025 tariffs imposed under emergency economic powers. The legal challenge follows months of friction over the administration's use of executive authority to bypass congressional oversight on trade policy. After the Supreme Court struck down an initial tariff round in February, the White House immediately invoked Section 122, citing a $1.2 trillion trade deficit recorded in 2024. Also, according to the Wall Street Journal, his latest ruling could set a significant precedent for more than 3,000 pending lawsuits seeking $166 billion in refunds for previously collected duties. While the trade court ordered the government to refund tariffs paid by the specific plaintiffs with interest, it declined to issue a nationwide injunction. This means the ruling does not provide immediate relief to all importers. In the meantime, the 10% tariffs are scheduled to expire in July anyway, at which point the White House plans to transition to Section 301 of the Trade Act to target what it describes as unfair trade practices and excess industrial capacity. Responding to the ruling, the Blue House said on Friday local time that Korea will continue to closely monitor related developments while seeking to maintain a balance of interests under its current tariff deal with the U.S. An official noted that the ruling currently applies only to specific plaintiffs and pointed out that Section 122 tariffs are limited by law to maximum of 150 days. The Trump administration is expected to appeal the decision. Kim Do-young, Arirang News.
The leaders of the U.S. and China are slated to sit down in Beijing late next week. And among the many issues on their agenda is that related to a possible partnership on artificial intelligence. Yun-jin explains.
The leaders of the United States and China are set to meet next week. And according to the Wall Street Journal, citing people familiar with the matter, Washington and Beijing are weighing the launch of official discussions about artificial intelligence. This comes at a time when risks posed by AI are more threatening than ever. AI systems behaving unexpectedly, autonomous military systems, or even potential attacks from non-state actors using powerful open-source tools. Putting official discussions on AI on the summit agenda would call for the two countries to manage the strategic stability of the very technology that the two sides are in a race to outcompete. This would be the second time that the topic of AI discussions has reached the presidential level, following previous engagement between former President Joe Biden and Xi Jinping in November of 2023. Experts and former administration aides have pointed out that while discussions to establish an AI hotline for communication at the leadership level have great value, historically, China has not used the crisis channels that the two countries already maintain. Rather than an alliance, the U.S. and China would need to prioritize AI safety and stability. New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman said the Trump-Xi summit next week could be the most significant encounter between American and Chinese leaders since Richard Nixon met Mao Zedong in Beijing in 1972. The two countries were able to land a tacit alliance against the Soviet Union, a common foe, which now is artificial intelligence. Separately, on Thursday, former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell was asked during a press meeting whether the upcoming summit would include efforts on North Korean issues, including the return of Trump's personal diplomacy with Kim Jong-un. Saying that it was a likely topic to be on the table, Campbell said Trump may ask Xi for suggestions on engaging with Kim. However, he also pointed out that the North's diplomatic and military standing has changed since the last Trump-Kim meeting, expressing skepticism as to whether Pyongyang would be interested in dialogue with Washington. Yun-jin, Arirang News.
Now, speaking of North Korea, the North has unveiled a new long-range artillery system capable of targeting Seoul, as the leader Kim Jong-un also inspected a warship set for naval deployment by mid-June. Cha Yun-kyung has more.
North Korea has announced the deployment of a new 155mm self-propelled artillery system that could potentially put Seoul within firing range. According to the North Korean Central News Agency, leader Kim Jong-un on Wednesday inspected a test of the long-range artillery's maneuverability before its commissioning, praising the weapon as having high mobility and firepower. Kim said that the system, which can strike targets more than 60 kilometers away, would be deployed within the year to 3 battalions along the southern border. In a separate KCNA report, Kim visited the country's first 5,000-ton warship Chehyun on Thursday to observe a maneuvering assessment ahead of its commissioning. Kim also supervised the destroyer being put through a navigation test in the West Sea, ordering it to be delivered to the Navy by mid-June as scheduled. Stressing the need to bolster defense capabilities on Thursday, the North Korean leader took part in a group photo with his daughter Chue alongside sailors on the deck of the Chehyun. 차윤경, Arirang News.
May 9th marks Europe Day, a day to celebrate the union of 27 member states following the Second World War. Now, in the spirit of unity, the EU ambassador spoke with Arirang News to highlight how bilateral efforts with Korea are being made to build strength in times of uncertainty. Oh Soo-young tells us more.
As global crises expose new vulnerabilities, South Korea and the European Union are building up a more resilient partnership.
This is the second energy crisis we are experiencing in the span of only a few years. The first one for Europe, it was in the wake of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Then we had to wean ourselves off oil and gas from Russia. But now, only a few years later, we see again our vulnerability vis-à-vis fossil fuel.
Speaking to Arirang News ahead of Europe Day, EU Ambassador to Korea Ugo Astuto said recent crises highlight the need to accelerate the transition toward greener and more resilient economies. A leading diplomatic advocate in Seoul for making the green transition, Astuto said Korea and Europe are already closely cooperating with their green and digital partnerships launched in 2023.
On the one hand, for instance, in the multilateral scene, with the climate negotiation. And then bilaterally, focusing on some sectors that can be particularly promising. Let me mention batteries, where Korea is a major champion worldwide. Offshore wind, where the European Union can bring considerable expertise. Or the defining of the emission trading systems.
Economic security is another joint concern. Last month, the European Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security visited Seoul, launching a new strategic dialogue on trade, supply chains and technology.
We need to look at our vulnerabilities. We mentioned earlier energy. There are others, rare earth, just to mention one. And we need to look together our best to address these vulnerabilities, how to mitigate our dependencies, and how to foster our strategic autonomy.
This year marks the 76th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration, which laid the foundations for the EU after World War II, growing from 6 members in the 1950s to 27 countries and roughly 450 million people today.
The European Union is a project of peace. It's a project founded in respect for the rule of law, in respect for human rights, for international law. In the fact that might does not make right. And these are principles which are all the more relevant today, at least as relevant today as they were in the 1950s, as we face a more and more erratic world scenario where we see a return to imperial wars in Europe emanating from Russia. So we need to make it clear again our belief in these principles and values which can work for the global common good.
Shared principles, he said, are drawing Korea and the EU closer together as like-minded democracies facing common challenges. He hopes to see a Korea-EU summit further expand the strategic partnership. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Thank you.
President Lee Jae-myung marked Parents' Day today with solemn words of comfort to the parents of firefighters and police officers who lost their lives in the line of duty.
사랑하는 자식을 먼저 떠나보내야 했던 그 슬픔 앞에서 어떤 말로도 위로를 다할 수 없음을 잘 압니다. 마지막까지 소임을 다했을 그 젊은 청년들의 숭고한 희생을 무겁게 기억하였습니다.
Now, these words were shared during a related ceremony hosted by the Korean Senior Citizens Association earlier this morning. The President and First Lady Kim Hye-kyung also took time to engage in a gesture of gratitude, common during Parents' Day here that is the pinning of carnations on parents by their children. Netflix's Korean horror hit If Wishes Could Kill is captivating in living rooms all around the world. The show's rising stars are also drawing attention alongside the success of the series itself. For more, we have our culture correspondent Park Gun-ho here in the studio. Welcome back, Gun-ho.
Great to be here, Danny.
So, Gun-ho, how popular is this new series?
I must say very. After its release in late April, If Wishes Could Kill debuted at number 4 on the Netflix's global non-English TV show chart in its first week, and it later climbed to the top spot, ranking number 1 in 24 countries and landing in the top 10 in more than 60 countries worldwide. And as the series continues to gain momentum globally, its lead actors are also drawing increasing attention. And I recently had the opportunity to speak with one of the stars of the show, so let's first go meet him. A wish granted, but at the cost of your life. That's the chilling premise behind Netflix's latest Korean horror hit Kirigo, or If Wishes Could Kill, which climbed to the top of the platform's global non-English TV chart the second week after release.
우선 기리고가 지금 넷플릭스 1위를 차지했는데요. 먼저 너무 축하드리고요. 1위를 딱 처음 하셨을 때 어떤 기분이셨나요?
When I woke up, my phone was flooded with congratulatory messages. I felt incredibly happy and thought to myself, wow, so this is what this kind of feeling is like.
One of the standout factors behind the series' success is its cast, which is largely made up of rising actors, including Hyun Woo-seok. Hard work behind the scenes became one of the driving forces behind the show's popularity.
Since this was such a major production, I initially felt huge pressure, but was able to overcome it thanks to the support of my fellow actors and the staff. I even arrived early on set to study coding with my teacher, which helped make my performance more convincing.
One critic said the appeal of new faces may have resonated even more strongly because the series was released on a streaming platform.
The new faces helped maintain viewer immersion, while the strong storytelling kept audiences engaged. Unlike theaters, streaming series rely less on star power and more on the quality of the story and acting.
Insiders also say the uniquely Korean horror elements have resonated with global audiences.
Factors like shamans gave the series its own distinct identity, and I think that became one of its biggest strengths. Of course, horror is about fear and jump scares, but beyond that, viewers also connected with the characters' relationships and chemistry.
The series combines traditional Korean shamanism with modern digital devices to create fear in a very contemporary way. The idea of making wishes through a smartphone app in exchange for death feels both like a survival game and a modern take on exorcism, which appears to be resonating strongly with overseas viewers.
The critic added that the future of K-horror lies not only in jump scares, but in compelling storytelling and detailed world building. And judging by the global response so far, audiences around the world may already wish for what Korean horror has to offer next, even a season 2 for Kirigo.
You know, whenever there's a popular series like this, many viewers wonder if there'll be a second series, and this is no different, I'm sure.
Right, so especially as there was a sort of teaser at the very end of the last episode. Also, director Park Hyun-seo recently said he has considered a second season and that it could become a reality if the first season performs well, which it already has. The cast has also expressed excitement about the possibility of another season, including Hyun Woo-seok.
If there's a second season, I'd absolutely love to be part of it. I'm also very curious about where the story could go next, whether the curse tied to the app would return again. As for Ha-jun's feelings for Seo, I just hope Seo at least recognizes his feelings a little. I still think there is a certain charm to Ha-jun quietly loving Seo from afar.
Well, I hope that's not a spoiler for our viewers. Now, speaking of K-horror, 살목지, The Whispering Water, is also continuing to gain more popularity after a month of its release, right?
That's right. So, 살목지 continues its strong run at the box office, drawing more moviegoers to theaters. And the film has attracted over 2.8 million moviegoers, becoming the second highest grossing Korean horror film of all time. It has even surpassed 곤지암 Haunted Asylum, which drew more than 2.6 million viewers in 2018, and it's now racing towards the 2003 film A Tale of Two Sisters, which earned over 3.1 million. With Korean horror finding success on both the big and small screens recently, experts say the genre itself has been evolving.
K-horror has become more diversified and sophisticated. Rather than relying solely on traditional horror elements, newer works are focusing more on immersive storytelling and stronger narratives, which are resonating with audiences both in Korea and overseas.
Yoon added that future horror films and dramas should continue following this successful formula, casting emerging actors and new directors to keep production costs lower while strengthening storytelling and suspense.
I see. Interesting. Konwoo, thanks for coming in tonight and for the coverage.
Always a pleasure.
Temperatures will stay slightly below seasonal averages tomorrow, with Seoul reaching around 22 degrees Celsius. But on Sunday, winds will shift from northwesterlies to warmer southwesterlies, pushing Seoul up to 25 degrees Celsius, bringing early summer-like weather. That said, day to night temperature gaps will widen to around 15 degrees, so make sure to dress in layers. Under the clear skies, UV levels will be very high in many areas during the daytime. So it's best to limit outdoor activities, but if you're planning to head outside, be sure to put sunscreen on. Meanwhile, strong winds are expected in parts of central and southern areas and Jeju Island, and parts of Daegu and Gyeongsang-Bukdo province will remain dry. As for temperatures, Seoul will start the day at 10 degrees Celsius, Daejeon at 8 degrees, Gwangju at 6 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 22 degrees. Daejeon, Daegu, Gyeongju will all top out at 24 degrees. Looking ahead, rain is forecast on Monday in central areas and parts of Jeollabukdo and Gyeongsang-Bukdo provinces.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
Are you curious about Korean cultural heritage?
If you are a fan of Korean culture and history, listen up. Korean cultural heritage is based on a 5,000-year history.
The whole country is like a massive museum because it possesses such diverse cultural properties. Let's not wait any longer and take a look.
First, for beginners. For those who are not familiar with Korea, let's start with the world-famous list.
You can see how Korea's beautiful traditional patterns and historical features have been preserved.
And don't forget to experience Korea's intangible cultural heritage. From Gangang-Sulle to Talchum, there's just so many exciting cultural heritages to experience.
These are for intermediate level tourists who have already visited Korea and its famous attractions. You might even be standing in a World Heritage Site right now.
How about searching for intangible cultural heritage that you can experience? 한소리, 제주 해녀 diving, 김장. Make some unforgettable memories while having fun.
Last but not least, the advanced level. It's the memory of the World Register. Korea possesses an extensive documentary heritage. Korea is serious about documentation and preservation.
A tour of Korean cultural heritage will become a legacy of your own.
Why not make your own Korean cultural heritage travel itinerary?
Isn't it fascinating?
Knock knock! The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Poli Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Pinkfong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? With the mysterious life forms Cabion by your side, you can become a Cabion master and save humanity like the total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imaginations. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. South Korea's benchmark Kospi has broken above the 7,000 mark for the first time, driven by strong gains in semiconductor stocks. Korea's stock market capitalization has now risen to 7th in the world, and some analysts are even raising the possibility of the Kospi reaching 10,000. But despite the market rally, concerns are also growing over rising volatility and a surge in leveraged investing by retail traders. Oil prices are also fluctuating again amid uncertainty in the Middle East, adding pressure to inflation and consumer sentiment here in South Korea. So tonight, we take a look at whether the current rally can continue and what rising prices could mean for the broader economy. And for this, we connect to Shin Se-don, professor at the Division of Business Economics at Sookmyung Women's University. A very big welcome.
Good evening.
And also joining us is Kim Yong-jin, professor at Sagang Business School. Good to see you again, Professor.
Good evening. Pleasure to be here.
So let's start a discussion first with Professor Shin. So like I've said, the Kospi, it recently broke above the 7,000 mark, and we hear semiconductors are seen as the key driver behind this. I wonder, what is your analysis of this current situation?
Well, I would say this is unbelievably amazing kind of surge in Kospi index. Stock price went up from 2,500 last year to 7,500. Which is about 3 times, and market capitalization was about 2,000 trillion won last year, but now it is over 5,000 trillion won. I couldn't have dreamed, in 1984 when Samsung first able to produce primitive DRAM, which is a 64K DRAM, was able to produce that, and at the time, Kospi index was 150. and market capitalization was 5 trillion. You just calculate how great the surge has been for the last 40 years. Definitely, it is a structural shift, but it was a long, delayed one in the sense that it took so long, for Korean stock market to rise up to 7,500. So I think it is a structural surge. And I believe it's going to stay there for some time. But the only concern now is about the pace of surge, about 300 percentage point in 1 year, and the 2.5 times, pace in increased market capitalization. I think that's a little bit too fast, and there are many people worrying about that. But I'm pretty confident that it's going to stay there for some times.
Wow. So it really is a very remarkable achievement. But alongside this market rally, retail investors are rapidly increasing leveraged stock investments. And given that, with market volatility also rising, Professor Kim, what about you? Would you say the stock market is currently in a stable growth phase?
Because I don't want to, kind of hurt Professor Shin's expectations, but I think it is hard to say that, while the South Korean stock market is currently experiencing a historic rally, it would be a stretch to call it a stable growth phase. It is more accurate to describe it as a high momentum expansion with elevated structural risks. It is, manifesting that the rally is backed by genuine and fundamental improvement, including record-breaking earnings from semiconductor giant. However, as you noted, the stability is undermined by the sheer volume of leveraged investment. With margin loan balances hitting all-time highs, which is surpassing 36 trillion won. A significant portion of the recent gains is built on borrowed money. A high, leverage may create a domino effect risk. Even a minor healthy correction can trigger margin calls, and leading to forced selling, which then accelerate the downward spiral. This can be indicated by the frequency of volatility interruption activations, which has doubled recently. It suggests that while the trend is up, the path is, incredibly jagged, indicating that investors are reactive and nervous. Moreover, the market remains sensitive to external shocks, such as, fluctuating oil prices due to ongoing Middle East, tensions. Highly leveraged market, this external black swan event, have a much larger impact than they would in a cash-rich market. In sum, the Korean market is in a robust bull market, but the stability factor is low. The massive influx of retail leverage has created a fragile floor. It is a phase characterized by high reward, but high systematic vulnerability.
Thank you so much for that opinion. Of course, we're open to any different kinds of opinions, so you don't have to worry about that, Professor Kim. But now, going back to Professor Shin's kind of a positive outlook, other major domestic and global brokerage firms are now raising their cost B forecast of up to 10,000 points. Professor Shin, what about you? What is your outlook, and what kind of variables could ultimately limit the rally?
Yeah, just just looking at the fact that the stock price went up from 2,500 to 7,500 in less than a year, and if we continue that pace of surge, reaching 10,000 is not an impossibility. So I think for the time being, it could reach 10,000 during this year. Problem is, could it stay there for long enough? Couldn't there be any major correction? In that respect, I think I agree that there is a severe kind of possibility of potential risk. And that risk, I think, is about interest rate hike, not just in United States, but in Korea. And also there's a global geopolitical risk, not just in the Middle East, but in other parts like Ukraine or, southern Pacific. So there's a pretty much of a potential risk. So I think we could not stay even 7,500 for a long period of time. We would have a correction probably down to 6,000 or probably 5,500. But it is not, the situation that we had in 2025 when the Kospi was 2,500. So I think there's a structural shift from 2,500 possibly to 4,000 or 5,000, even 7,000. In that respect, I think this surge is stable, even though there could be some possibility of, fluctuations, down several hundred points, up several hundred points. But I think we have reached a period of structural surge from 2,500 to possibly 5,000.
But despite these positive outlooks from various places, the stock, many people are still kind of feeling that the real economy, it's facing real problems. In particular, Korea's consumer inflation rate for April climbed 2.6%, which is the highest level in a year and 9 months as well. And inflation is expected to rise even further this May. Professor Kim, how are you looking at the inflation outlook right now?
Well, and I believe that the inflation outlook for South Korea is currently characterized by high uncertainty and persistent upward pressure, largely due to the external energy shocks and domestic supply factors. While the stock market reflects high expectations for technology export, as you mentioned, the real economy is struggling with a cost of living squeeze that is unlikely to ease in the immediate term. I would say in the short term, we'll have a continued upward pressure. The Bank of Korea expects inflation to rise further in May. This is driven by the continued impact of high global oil prices and a base effect. As prices for agriculture and fishery product fell significantly during the same period last year, making this year's year-on-year comparison appear higher. And global oil prices, have spiked due to the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz following geopolitical conflict. Diesel and gasoline prices in April already jumped to 30.8% and 21.1% respectively, marking their sharpest increase in nearly 4 years. A weaker Korean won is exacerbating the situation by increasing the cost of imported goods and further fueling imported inflation. This situation is reflected on public inflation expectations, which have risen to 2.9%. This means that consumers anticipate price to stay high, which can lead to a sticky inflation environment where wage demand and price hikes reinforce each other. So I believe that the disconnect between the booming stock market and the difficult real economy will likely widen. And high interest rate intended to curb this inflation will continue to put pressure on household and small business through the summer.
All right, so this is a very concerning situation indeed. But if this oil-driven inflation continue to accelerate more seriously, Professor Shin, could you tell us, explain for our viewers, what kind of ripple effects could we see in interest rate policy and the exchange rate as well?
Yeah, if inflation rate goes up beyond 3%, that's going to invite Bank of Korea to raise interest rate. And, knowing that the factor of Korean higher inflation is not confined to Korea, it is a global phenomenon. So the United States inflation will go up and America should also raise their interest. So if inflation persists, the global interest rate has to go up, which means that dollars is going to get very stronger. And once exchange rate won has to get weaker, which we experienced a few years ago. So interest rate hike and the weakening Korean currency is the most important kind of a ripple effects that we could expect from this wave of inflation. But problem is, many people are talking about inflation in Korea, which was 2.6% the month of, I think, last April. But to me, Bank of Korea is concerned about core CPI, which was 2.2%. So 2.2% inflation is not something that we have to seriously worry about. Of course, if the oil shock continues more than a couple of months down the road, that may bring a significant worry. But for the time being, and believing that Iran conflict is going to end sooner or later, I am not the kind of person too much worried about inflation. So I think at the current moment, at least, inflation is not something that we have to worry about.
Like Professor Shin has mentioned, oil prices, international oil prices, initially fell on hopes for possible U.S.-Iran negotiations, but it turned higher again as reports of clashes have emerged. Professor Kim, so as this oil price volatility continued to grow, what kind of impact could it have on consumer sentiment here in South Korea?
So before I get to the point, I appreciate Professor Shin's, optimistic view about the inflation. I like that. But, it is, really impossible to tell how things are going in the near future. However, one thing which is very, very clear is that all of this problem caused by, the U.S.-Iran, conflict, right? And even the fresh military strike in the Strait of Hormuz yesterday have disrupted a critical choke point that handles approximately 20% of the world oil supply. The oil market is currently caught in a cycle of headline volatility. Prices initially dipped in early May on rumors of peace deal, but they sharply reversed following report that the U.S. struck Iran military site in retaliation for attacks on U.S. warship. Now, Brent crude has been fluctuating between $95 and $115 per barrel, while a fragile ceasefire is technically in place. Peace remains elusive, leading to intraday price swings of 3 to 4%. If the Strait of Hormuz remains contested or closed, for a full quarter, the price could peak between $110 and $130. If a full-scale blockade occurs, it might be goes up to like $150. How does the situation influence Korean economy? As a country that import nearly all its energy, South Korea is exceptionally vulnerable to these shocks. In April this year, Korea's consumer inflation hit a 2.6% year-on-year increase. I mean, Professor Shin says it has 2.2 core, so it might not be worried much. But this is fastest pace in nearly 2 years, right? This was driven by largely by a 21.9% spike in petroleum product prices. The consumer sentiment index recently fell to 99.2, crossing the threshold into pessimistic territory for the first time in a year. High energy costs act as a regressive tax, reducing the disposable income of middle and low-income families and stalling private consumption. In addition, the Korean won is weakened significantly, hitting the lowest point since the 2009 financial crisis. The BOK is under mounting pressure to consider interest rate hike. Probably, potentially, it might be in July. To defend the currency and curb inflation, despite the risk of slowing growth. Putting all things together, we may see the situation where rising costs squeeze the middle class, while broader economy remains stagnant.
So what's certain is that the situation in the Middle East, it's really raising uncertainty globally. And of course, the oil price, it's being a very big impact. And South Korean government, in fact, lately froze the 5th oil price cap, marking the 3rd straight move. Professor Shin, do you think this could be seen as a move focused on stabilizing inflation? And also, how effective would this measure actually be?
Of course. You know, this current government has been dedicating on stabilizing, above anything else, the inflation and mostly gasoline price. So there has been some criticism about how effective would that be of the price cap, but there has been 4 price cap in the previous periods, and now it is the 5th time. And if the oil price and gas price rise further, I think government will adopt stronger measures, much stronger measure to curb its effect upon gas prices. So I believe that at least in part, government is trying to alleviate, the problem of a higher gas price affecting, the consumer. So Of course, it's not 100%, but I think it's pretty effective so far, containing gas price on the gas pump.
But what about some other macroeconomic side effects that could come from these oil price cap system, Professor Kim? Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I agreed, to Professor Shin's. I couldn't agree, Professor Shin's idea more. I 100% agree, but there might some side effect of these things, right? So this the energy price cap might serve as a short-term painkiller to curb inflation and inflation, right? But long-term inflation, often lead to a significant, macroeconomic distortions and structural weakness, including market disruption and supply shortages, worsening fiscal and public corporate health, and resource misallocation and overconsumption, distorted economic signals and policy failure, and finally potential for black markets and quality issues. As we assume that lasts longer, right? And so basically, when prices are artificially suppressed, energy companies see reduced profit margins, leading them to cut back on exploration, production, and infrastructure maintenance. Over time, this leads to a domestic supply crunch. Moreover, once the cap is eventually lifted, prices spring back up violently to catch up with the market reality, and causing a much more severe inflationary shock later. Secondly, the global energy costs rise, but domestic rates are frozen. The state-run utilities like the Korea Electric Power Corp or Korea Gas Corp accumulate massive deficit. These losses eventually require taxpayer funded bailout or the issuance of massive amount of corporate bond, which can crowd out other borrowers in the credit market, drive up in the interest rate. Thirdly, artificially low prices remove the incentive for business and households to conserve energy, or invest in green alternatives. This leads to wasteful consumption patterns. I'm not exaggerating, but this is what we're expecting, right? Increasing the country's overall energy dependency and trade deficit. It also, slowed down the transition to renewable energy because fossil fuels remain cheap. Fourthly, artificial prices make it difficult for Bank of Korea to gauge the true level of inflationary pressure in the economy. This can lead to policy errors. Finally, to bypass this price limit, off the books trading can emerge. Additionally, the distributors may lower the quality of the fuel to maintain their profit margins, which ultimately harms the consumer.
So it will be critical to see how the South Korean government would lead its economic direction from here. I would like to say thank you so much for both of your insights. Despite having different opinions, we really enjoyed it, and I think it was very respectful in all aspects. So I want to thank you both again. We'll have to wrap our discussion right here. Once again, thank you so much for your insights, Professor Shim and Professor Kim. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
저는 만 5살에 바이올린을 시작했는데요. 바이올린 소리를 워낙 좋아했어서 그 특유